and welcome finally to the part 3 of this Asus P3B-F build. This is mostly about watching spreadsheets, but before going to that, perhaps it's best if I shortly try to explain what I tested and why. And I suppose star of this show is C3 Nehemiah, because I have most benchmark results for that. And basically I'm testing all the other CPUs against Nehemiah, and it's basically the only CPU where I tested every one of those graphics cards, and those are GeForce 2 GTS, GeForce 4 Ti 4200, GeForce FX 5500, PowerVR Kyro, and Voodoo 3000. I also wanted some Radeon, and there's really no other Radeons because, well, anything newer didn't work. If you want to use 133 MHz frontside bus on a Intel BX chipset, well, that means overclocking the AGP to 89 MHz. And Radeons do not simply work with that high clocked AGP, but GeForces and Voodoos do work. But one of these Radeons did work, and it was this Piglet. And Piglet, well, basically it's so crippled Radeon 7000 that I wouldn't want to even call it Radeon, because everything is halved. Basically, the Piglet is something like TNT2. It offers about same performance. But TNT2 in this test. Oh, I forgot to mention we have TNT2 as well, yes. Well, my TNT2, it didn't work good at all at first, because I think someone has tried to do some BIOS mod for it, and that was really bad idea, because, well, it reports it has TNT2 Pro BIOS, but the clocks, well, the core clock is 100 MHz and it should be 125 with TNT2, the basic TNT2, and it should, most of them have 150 MHz memory clock, and this BIOS sets memory clock to 150 MHz. But unfortunately, although this is full TNT2 in a way that it has 128-bit bus, well, this card only has 7 nanosecond memory, and that can't do 150 MHz. And I got graphics errors quite soon, but I knew what to suspect, because I did notice that, and I wondered how it can be 7 nanosecond when TNT2 should be 150 MHz. But apparently this was power color, some model. Apparently there are those with 7 nanosecond memories, and they simply use 140 MHz memory clock. So yeah, this was one of those cards. But not only now, also I had to use Riva to downclock, to underclock, or rather set the memory clock to what it should be. I used 143 MHz instead of 140, but 143 MHz was no problem, and that's what 7 nanosecond can do. But core clock, I couldn't restore it to 125. Riva just, well, it failed to set it. So it was 100 MHz for all TNT tests here. Perhaps with proper clocks it would have been better match for the Piglet, but I think there's not big difference. But yes, about the tests. Windows test, well, we have 3D Mark 99, 2000 and 2001. I guess none of those require any explanation. I use them because they are very well known. But 3D Mark 2000. 2001 is perhaps a bit too much for this system, except for the fastest Tualatin Celeron. and we'll look those benchmarks later. But 3D Mark 2000, well, it looks like if you have fast enough graphics card, it turns into a CPU benchmark if anything else. But is it really bad? Well, not really. And 3D Mark 99, well, I don't have Nehemiah scores for it, because it didn't work with it. Well, the benchmark ran, of course, very nicely, but it didn't display any results and not FPS counter. It was 0 and something during the tests. And I think this is because it fails to detect the CPU. I don't know if it's... Well, I don't know if maybe some Cyrix 686 for compatibility mode where it doesn't use the counter inside CPU, but whatever the reason, I blame the 3D Mark, not the Nehemiah. And after running this test, I did look Nehemiah datasheets, and this applies Ezra as well. But Ezra did work with 3D Mark 99 because it has 3D now instructions and not SSE. And I think this SSE, well, I hope this isn't one of those that decided that only Intel CPU can have SSE, and that's not that's completely false, of course, because Nehemiah have SSE instructions while the Ezra have 3D now instructions. But really, what I was saying, that these C3 CPUs, well, they can fake their CPU ID, and so you can, if necessary, make software identify them as Coppermine, for example, and we can later, not during this video, but sometimes later on another video, try if that helps 3D Mark 99 and how it's done, and because I think this is something that would probably make this work. But this is the reason why there is no 3D Mark 99 scores at the moment. And actual games, well, I have Quake 2 and Unreal Gold, and they are both 98, released in 98, and they are, well, perhaps this I would have needed some more demanding game for these. They are, well, great benchmarks for 99 systems, but really, perhaps they could to benchmark TNT2, the 2 performance level graphics cards, but anything above that, well, you just get high score, except Unreal Minimum. These are the minimum FPS, are perhaps the thing you should pay most attention to. And then there's another thing, vertical synchronization, because you could disable it from the NVIDIA drivers for OpenGL, but not for Direct 3D. Well, there's, of course, Riva Tuner probably could have done it, but I didn't want to use it. So basically, Unreal Gold, well, it has VSync enabled for everything else except for Voodoo 3, and that Voodoo 3 has it disabled by default, while NVIDIA has it enabled by default. And also 3D Mark 99 doesn't disable it if it's enabled, but 3D Mark 2000 and 2001, well, they disable it. Basically, the Unreal maximum FPS, well, on most of these tests, they are basically what the VSync is, but I'll go to that later. And now, the more important and perhaps interesting, at least for me, are the DOS tests, or rather compatibility tests. Well, there are of course benchmark results. I'm using the Phil's DOS benchmark pack. It's excellent collection of DOS benchmarks in easy to use way, and these are basically what I've chosen, and there's actually a couple of more here here added to the Nehemiah DOS tests. Doom, of course, Quake. Top bench is synthetic benchmark and I don't quite like it. It's good on the real old systems, but when you have real fast VGA, well, it affects the overall score quite a lot. So it's best for the old systems. But then there's PC Player. It would have been otherwise good, but it uses FPU, and that of course affects results because really there's very little games that use FPU, and I don't think anything that actually requires, except Quake, of course, those games for that is. And Quake, of course, is very dependent on the FPU, but the PC Player, well, it just supports it if it's available, and if you compare these results to some old system, well, you perhaps don't, because modern system, when slowed down, well, you have FPU, and the old system, especially if it's 386, most likely doesn't have FPU. And even if it's 486, you have slow FPU, but since games doesn't even use FPU, well, it affects scores, and you simply can't compare these to old systems. Perhaps I should simply stop taking PC Player benchmarks completely, but it does have one which that we'll take a look later. Then there's 3D bench 1.0C, that's for faster systems, and 1.0 is for the slower systems, because they do give quite the same score, not always exact, but very close. But on fast systems, well, like here, at some point the FPS counter simply fails and you don't get proper score. So the 1.0C, well, you use it for faster systems to actually get the FPS reading. But if you have really slow system, or rather this one here, on very slow systems, the 1.0C, well, it gives, at some point starts to give too high score. And well, you can obviously, if you watch the benchmark, you can see that this for example, there's no way it could have been 30 FPS because it was slideshow. And here, on the other hand, this score is so fast that the older 3D bench, well, it displays some bad value. So for really slow systems, you have to use the 1.0, and for fast systems, you need to use the 1.0C. But now the interesting tests. What I have here is I've used just Jackrabbit 1.2, but that doesn't really matter. I simply had 1.2. And this test for Turbo Pascal 7, it was in some Turbo Pascal libraries, that if you have too fast system, it gives this error 200 division by 0. And well, it basically means you have too fast systems, because whatever happens there, and there are many software that, of course, because this is in compiler libraries, so a lot of programs have compiled with this one. But because of that, there's also lots of patches. So if you encounter this, well, perhaps just find newer version, and there's ways to patch this if there's no official update to whatever you're using. But really, you need to know this is caused by too fast systems. So what this test does is I'm simply testing when this game just Jackrabbit starts and not. And it's as simple as that. It either starts or it doesn't, and give this error. And of course, if it doesn't start, I'll try to slow it down so it finally can start. But the OPL tests, they are the really interesting ones. Cycles, or rather the Cycles International Grand Prix Racing. Well, this is something I played a lot on my XT clone back in the day, and of course on later systems as well. and it is quite sensitive. Well, basically it is made for two 86s. And it does run on XD, especially fast XD systems, but it's playable, but not really that enjoyable. But that didn't really matter back in the day. I had CGA and 8 MHz NEC with 20 CPU. But I played that, and yeah, it does support AdLib, so it's made for OPL2. And it is, since it's made for 286s, well, it doesn't have proper delays that you should use when programming OPL, and so you have failures on fast systems. First, you may have coupled audio, and eventually the game doesn't start at all. It was this abnormal program termination. I think that it displays you have way too fast system. And then there's Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade adventure game, and I really need to point out I have 3 versions of that game, and they are all VGA versions, not the EGA 16 color version. And the 16 color version, I think I don't even know if there's multiple versions. I haven't done a lot of research about that, but I think the 16 color version, it basically behaves like this oldest VGA version. So it's the most sensitive. And I think this oldest Indy 3 is perhaps the most sensitive OPL game I've encountered so far. And these 3 versions, well, this is the release version from 1990. VGA taftage, of course. This is the size if you want to identify your version. And there was separate patch released on 1991. You can download the patch somewhere and apply it to yourself if you want, or maybe it was just simply the new exe file, I don't remember, but it's a bit bigger. And finally you have third version as well. This is found on the Classic Adventures collection, and I did have that collection back in the day, if this is the floppy collection. Well, I had some collection that came with Maniac Mansion, Jack McCracken, Indy 3 and Monkey Island. Was it those 4 games, I think. But I was damn stupid and sold it. Damn, it would have been real nice to have that one. I think it was one of those games I sold to get Super Nintendo, but that's another story. And I also sold my XD, for that matter. Or perhaps I sold that game no, whatever. I think it was I sold my 8-bit Nintendo and XD, and perhaps it was that game, because it was, of course, in box and very good condition, and then I got Super Nintendo that I still have, and I think we should open it on some video, because it's known to have leaky caps inside, so it needs to be recapped. And I think I have some issues with the power supply. The cord, I think, is broken, so there's another repair as well, but let's forget that for now. This final last version of this in the Last Crusade, it's a lot smaller executable size because it's compressed, and it came with this collection, and it is the least sensitive. You can even start it with slow Pentium systems and you won't have any problems with OPL3 at least. So having all these 3, well, it's really nice way to test OPL3, and actually I think same applies to Monkey Island as well, because I know it already has 486 patch for the oldest version, But I'm not sure. Did the version that came with the collection, is it basically the 486 version or is it the third version as well? But since that game supports multiple sound cards, this Last Crusade is much better for testing this, because it only supports Adlib and PC speaker. And it fails in quite a nice way actually, because it either works or the auto detection doesn't work, but the Adlib sounds work if you specify the A command line parameter. So basically you force the Adlib to be used. And if you have a bit faster system than that, well, it fails completely even without the command line parameter. So we have 3 different versions that can work without command line parameter or with the command line parameter. So there's quite a lot of points, different points where this can stop working. And so it's real nice to test this OPL. I don't know anything better. This is absolutely golden test to test OPLs. And of course system slowdown and what is too fast and what is not. But this cycles, I like this one as well. And I've also played Last Crusade even more on that XT and later systems as well. And of course I had CGA, so I played it with 4 colors. And this game, by the way, we are testing when you have too fast system, when it starts to fail. This Adlib sounds at least. But this game, well, it is speed sensitive to reverse way as well, because you can't do some ways with too slow CPU, and basically you can't win all the fights if you have too slow CPU. Something I learned quite well back in the day. But really Sierra's games, they're the ones with lots and lots of different speed related issues in both directions, too fast and too slow. But that's of course another issue and another story. And so Nehemiah is here, and we jump to the Katmai. No, Nehemiah is here, and let's place Katmai here. Katmai, very worst Pentium 3, and I have 550 MHz version. That's the second fastest Katmai, and I think this Asus P3B-F was released quite close, perhaps bit earlier than the 600 MHz or the fastest Katmai. So if you were one of the first to buy the P3BF motherboard, well, this would have been the fastest GPU available at the time. When I had P3BF motherboard, I have 450 MHz Katmai, but of course 600 was already released by then, and the 450, well, it was really nice overclocker. And I didn't want Celeron back in the day because I wanted this to be future-proof. SSE instructions, of course, and 100 MHz bus, and Celerons didn't have either. Although I don't remember, I have 450 MHz Pentium 3, but perhaps there was of course Celerons 533 at least. Perhaps that would have been even cheaper, who knows, but I really wanted real Pentium 3. But that's not the point here. Let's take this Nehemiah, and I started testing with TNT2, and remember, this is now the underclocked TNT2, but not bus half M64, but real TNT2 with 128-bit memory. Well, as I already mentioned, I couldn't run 3D Mark 99 with this Nehemiah, and it's not CPU's fault. It's the bad CPU detection on the 3D Mark, but we'll eventually try on another video to fake the CPU ID. So these we can ignore. Let's get them out of sight. So 3D Mark 2000. Well, there's really no difference, and the reason is quite simple. TNT2 is the bottleneck here. What about 2001? Well, we do get better scores with Nehemiah, but of course TNT2 must be bottleneck here as well, because it's slow. So yeah, both of these CPUs are fast enough, so you want to use something faster than TNT2. Well, perhaps if you really want to use 99 graphics card on these 99 CPUs, well, there are those faster clocked TNT2 Pro and Ultra. And of course, we are underclocking the TNT2 here, so yeah. But TNT2 is bottleneck here. Now let's take a look at Unreal. And these minimum scores, well, Nehemiah can do better. And that's clear indication that Nehemiah here is the faster CPU. Of course, we are forgetting that Nehemiah here runs at 1200 MHz and Pentium 3 at 550 MHz, but still, we simply forget that for here and notice that Nehemiah is faster than 550 MHz Pentium 3 or the Katmai. And I spoil you a bit. 600 MHz Katmai can't reach Nehemiah. That's absolutely sure. And Quake 2, well, it's same thing really. Perhaps it's not such a big difference, but yeah, Nehemiah is faster. We do have GeForce 2 results here as well, so those are more interesting. Let's take a look. Well, now that you have GPU power, we can clearly see. We can easily see here that the Pentium 3 is now the bottleneck. In every test, the Nehemiah does better. And there's even a quite big difference on 3D Mark 2000. But here I need to point out that I started doing tests here. I had VSync on by default. The OpenGL VSync on NVIDIA drivers on by default, and that affects these TNT2 results as well. But these I later run Nehemiah scores, no these of course, again, because basically these are VSync limited. I have plug and play monitor. It was Philips 17-inch CRT. Well, by default it sets 600 by 480, 120 Hz, and this quite can't do it. And 800 by 600 was 100 Hz, and here we are limited. And 124 resolution was 85 Hz, and we are at the VSync limit as well, but basically we are here as well. But here these are unlimited results. And of course Unreal is always set VSync on every other card except on Voodoo 3. It's very obvious that Nehemiah is the faster CPU here. And let's take a look at those tests quickly. I'm not going to compare here to Nehemiah at the moment. Those results need to be looked separately. But basically, you have very little options to slow down without throttling, that is. Disabling level 2, well, level 2 case, well, it has very little impact. It has impact of course, but it's not even enough to fix this error 200, because here I underclocked frontside bus, so this is now 366 MHz with L2 disabled and is still too fast for this error 200. and it should tilt you fast for just about anything because it's just fast. And so you need to disable L1 if you want to run anything speed sensitive. When you do that, it's absolutely very slow. These are, I have done a lot of benchmarking, but of course on paper, and I don't have papers, so I have very limited of these slow systems. I need to build this, make more spreadsheets on slow real systems, but we'll do that eventually. We do have L1 scores here. Let's jump to here. So L1 we have 3D pens. Let's take that here. We have Doom minimum graphics at something like 13 FPS and 3D pens less than 8. Let's try to find something. Here is 8 and 14. So basically we are talking about 486 DX33 with L1 disabled, and that basically means 286 performance, because here is 386 DX25, we get 10 FPS, and Doom slow we are about 20. So yeah, L1 disabled and you're about 286 performance, and of course the Just Jackrabbit, well, it's going to run too slow. This would of course work, I didn't even test them here. But yeah, without throttling, this isn't something you want to use this CPU for DOS gaming, that's for sure. But I had Pentium 450 back in the day, and I had to go to the BIOS to disable NVAL because I didn't have any utility to do that. The one that I used on 486 as well, that didn't even work. So every time go to the BIOS, disable L1, and then it's too slow. But that's you wanted to play those games, well, that's how it goes. That was back then. And let's jump to the Tualatin Celeron. But first let's compare this GeForce 2 results. When you have GeForce, you don't want to use 16-bit rendering unless some game doesn't support 32. So that's why it was pointless to even run the 16-bit. I did try the default benchmark on those 3D marks, but this was one way to limit things to test, because this took a lot longer than I ever thought it would have been. But 3D Mark 2000, well, what else there is to be said? Of course the Tualatin Celeron at 1200 is going to be faster. But here 124 with 32-bit rendering. This is bottleneck for the GeForce 2 GTS. But you have faster clocked GeForce 2s, you have GeForce 2s with 64 megabytes RAM. It could be memory clock here, that's the bottleneck, or memory size, I'm not sure. But really, if you want GeForce 2, just get faster model and this won't be a problem. We can easily say the Tualatin Celeron is faster here. Quake, we can forget about this because these are still the VSync limited values. And minimums at Unreal, where there's noticeable difference. Celeron is at 1200 is of course faster. But both of these, well, maximums are at VSync. Average, well, because maximums go here, they also affect the average, but so the minimums are the best thing to watch here. But even the average is better. Well, of course it's going to be better, but these are actually quite good results. So you certainly don't have to get faster CPU for Unreal. If you want Unreal to work better, get Voodoo, as we're going to see later. But now here are the underclock scores. 66 MHz bus, so it's 800 MHz. And then it gets slower than the Nehemiah. Remember, we need to compare here. Actually, let's move. But of course, this CPU is now bottlenecked by slow frontside bus. But it does prove that Tualatin 800 MHz underclocked with 66 MHz bus, well, Nehemiah can easily outperform that one. Next, GeForce 3 scores here. Well, of course, if it was already faster with GeForce 2, well, of course, the Tualatin performs even better with GeForce 4. But there's something interesting. Let's move this. At Nehemiah, 3D Mark 2000 scores came down with GeForce 4. So GeForce 2 was faster. And the reason, one of the best reasons why you would want to use GeForce 2 is that you can use the old, most compatible drivers with oldest games. And GeForce 4, these are the 40-something drivers. And well, they are slower. Do they require faster CPU? Perhaps they are no longer as good optimized for GeForce 2. It doesn't really matter. But you can easily notice that these are quite a lot faster, these 3D Mark 2000. But 3D Mark 2001 scores, well here GeForce 4 easily beats GeForce 2, but this game already is games like these are already too much for this anyway, so I don't think this tell that much. It's the real game benchmarks, and this is something where I would have wanted something new game. And here I measured the anti-aliasing as well, how much it affects. But even with anti-aliasing it doesn't bring down to here, but these are too slow anyway, and perhaps you want to use Windows XP system anyway for something like this. But this of course is entirely different thing. But here Quake 2 scores came down as well. Of course it doesn't matter if they are fast enough already. But Unreal, well, there's not much difference. Actually, these are perhaps marginally faster, but quite the same really. And perhaps biggest difference is that at this highest resolution I tested, well, GeForce 4 is no bottleneck like GeForce 2 was. But yeah, you really don't need anything faster than GeForce 2 with Nehemiah. If you really want to use this higher resolution, just get the faster GeForce 2s. The Tualatin Celeron, well, it's easily faster, very easily, and here are the anti-aliasing results as well. Not much to say, except I tried to use anti-aliasing for Unreal, but screen, it wasn't centered and it was really unusable for that one. And that's basically, if you want to use GeForce 4 but just to get anti-aliasing for old games, well, it's not going to work always. That's certainly true. So I don't think this is such a big feature here, but there are some more better reasons to choose GeForce 4 actually. But yeah, faster CPU. Tualatin is faster CPU, and here are the underclocked GeForce 4 scores, yes. And yeah, we are now under the Nehemiah scores, just like with GeForce 2. Not really much to say. And what else did I test here? I did test this GeForce 5500. Oh yeah, I have overclocking scores, of course, for this Tualatin Celeron, and this was bad overclocker, so was the other Celeron, but I didn't even do Windows stuff with that one. Well, even slight overclocking and you need 1.65 volts, and this is of course 1.5 volt CPU. So this definitely isn't this CPU overclocking, but I did use 1.65 volts, so I could get these results. But even that voltage, it still can't do 124 MHz frontside bus. So forget about 133. It's simply not going to work. And heat wasn't the issue. Heatsink was only slightly warm. The cooling on this is very, very good on my build. And for 3D Mark 2000, here we can easily see at one point when you have fast enough GPU, well, this 3D Mark 2000, it's basically it's a CPU benchmark after some point. But everything else of course went up. And that's the way. But here we can see that Unreal, well, it definitely benefits from faster frontside bus. So the frontside bus here is the bottleneck for Unreal. But yeah, I think for this fastest Tualatin CPUs, the GeForce 4 Ti, well, I think it's a really good match. So want to build Tualatin system? Well, I can recommend GeForce 4. So GeForce 4, really good for fastest Tualatins. But too fast for Nehemiah. That's basically how it goes. But the GeForce FX 5500, and I have of course benchmarked it with Nehemiah as well. Well, I don't have for the Nehemiah. Did I forget that one? But I do have for something else. But really, what you really need to know. This, yes, it was 45.20T drivers I used with GeForce 4. And these drivers also support every other GeForce FX, except it didn't support this 5500. And 5500, it's really higher clocked 5200. So I force install it to 5200 Ultra. But the clocks are above that. But there was some Unreal issue. It was so slow, whatever resolution, whatever I tried. So there was definitely some driver issue. Is it because I forced installed it to these older drivers? Who knows? Something else? I don't know. But it was slow anyway. The card, even without Unreal. We can see, on Quake 2, we can't even hit the VSync limit. And even GeForce 2 easily did that one. 3D Mark 2000, let's take the... We are here with GeForce 2 and quite a lot of lower with this FX 5500. And I don't blame the PCI bus here. I think this one has 226 megabytes of memory, so AGP isn't really needed after loading everything to graphics card's memory. But this was simply slow. And especially the 3D Mark 2001, the nature demo, well, it was slideshow. If you want FX series for pixel shader instead of some GeForce 2 or GeForce 4 MX, well, don't. It was so slow anyway, so if you want GeForce FX, go with the fastest cards, but not 5500 and of course not 5200. GeForce 4 Ti, it's much faster in everything. This was really a bad card. But I think it was Ezra where I tested this, but it will go to... There's some DOS issue I'm going to talk about later, but about later GeForces. But that's about it. Nehemiah is slower than Tualatin Celeron, and of course it was supposed to be slower. So the question now is, what about Coppermine? And we have GeForce 2 tested with Coppermine. This is 667. As you can see, well, that's the 99 we don't have here. Let's skip that. See how close they are together. On 3D Mark 2001, the Coppermine has some small advantage, and I'm quite sure that's because Coppermine has faster SSE instructions, but really we built this system for earlier 98 games. These are basically games that rely on SSE instructions, where they basically Windows XP era games anyways, so they are out of this build anyway. So it really doesn't matter if Coppermine has slight advantage on SSE instructions. Quake, for some reason, is a bit faster on the Coppermine, and there's perhaps a little advantage on Unreal as well. But 3D Mark 2000, well, they are basically the same. Actually, there are sometimes Nehemiah is a bit faster here and on 3D Mark 2000, but other than that, well, we are talking about CPUs that are very close in performance. So basically, this 1200 MHz Nehemiah is just as fast as 667 Coppermine. Both of these are at 133 MHz frontside bus, and so there's no difference in there either. And they simply perform very much identical. I tested these older drivers that I can test with this. I have AGP Vorex GeForce 4 that supports older drivers. With the 8X AGP, well, you have to use these drivers I show you. But these older drivers, they are a bit faster. And here are every other, these on darker background, well, they are non-overclocked, and these on white are overclocked results. And here let's put them next to this Coppermine. And overclocking helps. And this is, by the way, very stable at where did I use? Yes, 1466 MHz, absolutely no problems. But anything above that, then it becomes unstable. Well, here it easily, you can see that we get much better 3D Mark 2000 scores, but these are pretty much CPU dependent at this point. 2001 scores, well, they raise quite nicely. And Unreal minimums, could this be it may became a bit too slow at some point during this test for some reason, but really slow minimum FPS scores, well, they benefit, and everything else, of course. So I suppose if you want PR rating for this Nehemiah, is divide clock rate by 2, and that's pretty much the Coppermine Pentium 3. It goes against it, and I think that's quite honest PR rating. So this, you can overclock perhaps to something like 700 MHz Coppermine or 733 with this 133 MHz frontside bus. But yeah, this is how it compares to Coppermine. To easily compare them, just divide Nehemiah clock rate by 2, and here's your Coppermine equivalent for that one. So what about DOS Those I haven't talked, and I've talked quite a lot about Windows benchmarks, and those aren't that interesting, at least for me. This was supposed to be more of a DOS build. So let's go to the Ezra-T. And what Windows benchmarks I have? GeForce 2. Perhaps biggest change between Nehemiah and Ezra is that Ezra runs FPU at half the clock speed, while Nehemiah runs it at full clock speed. So basically Nehemiah has much faster FPU. Now let's go to the GeForce 2, and we can run 3D Mark 99 because it properly detects that we have 3D now instructions, even though we don't have AMD CPU. Ezra-T is more like SuperSocket 7 CPU on an Intel platform, but these are, by the way, VSync limited, so we can't compare these. No, of course they are not. Of course they are not, because this could be just so close, but this would have been 100 and this would have been 85 if they are VSync limited. This just happens to be here. So, but let's take the DD Mark scores first. Well, Nehemiah is faster. No matter what you compare, it's easily faster. Quake 2, it's easily faster. But I need to add, if you just build this system on 98 games, well, the Ezra is fast enough for those. It's just 2000 where you might find faster CPU, like the Nehemiah. And Unreal minimum, well, that's when Nehemiah is clearly the faster one. But really you can play Unreal with Ezra-T, no problem. But if you want to build Ezra-T system for Windows as well, I highly recommend Voodoo 3. It's the best match what is Ezra. By the way, I tried to overclock Ezra as well. 100 MHz frontside bus. Well, it could do this 1200 MHz, but 124, well, it wasn't enough, at least with stock voltage. I didn't even try to raise voltage. And here, let's first compare the GeForce and Voodoo 3. And these are of course with Glide renderer, because I absolutely want to use with real Voodoo Glide whenever possible. And the minimum scores, well, there's noticeable difference, and this is really why you want to play Unreal with real Voodoo. It's much faster. Quake 2, well, GeForce 2 is faster there, and it doesn't even change if you use the 3DFX mini GL driver. It's faster than the default GL driver, but still slower than GeForce 2, and of course GeForce 2 is much faster card. We can the 3D Mark results show that quite easily. Ezra can benefit from faster GPU than Voodoo 3, but really here it benefits so much that I really would choose Voodoo 3 for the Ezra. But we have Voodoo 3 results for the Nehemiah as well. No wait, these were the overclocking results, and these are the non-overclocking. But it doesn't much change the Glide renderer. Well, it is minimums are much better, many FPS better. But here let's take the Nehemiah Voodoo 3. It's easily faster than this overclocked Ezra, and we are now at the same clock rates. This has a little bit lower frontside bus, but otherwise these are very comparable results. Again, you get several FPS boost for the minimums. And here, well, we are always over 30 FPS at minimum. So yeah. And I really would have liked Voodoo 5 with Nehemiah, and I'm sure it would have been simply excellent. But getting Voodoo 5, well, it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be cheap, and so I may never have Voodoo 5 here, but who knows? I can only hope. Because I think that would have been dream GPU for this Nehemiah build. And I can already tell you at this point that yeah, Nehemiah performs so well that I'm going to keep it in this system, and I'm not going to try to make some change to Tualatin Celeron if necessary thing. If Nehemiah, it's already so fast that if some game you want faster CPU, well, just go to the Windows XP system. It's going to be Windows XP era game anyway, so yeah, why even try? Whatever is made really for Windows 98, the Nehemiah can handle it. Minimum at Unreal like this. Doesn't matter what GeForce you have, 2, 4. you won't get anything anywhere close here. Well, here they are. Overclocking results, even heavily overclocking this CPU, and you're still below this Voodoo 3 minimums. Unreal is basically made originally for Glide, and it shows. And I think Unreal benefits most from Glide rendering. Of course, there are many Glide games as well, but I think Unreal, these results here show Voodoo at its best. And this is Voodoo 3, not even Voodoo 5. But I don't have Voodoo 2 results at the moment, because that will have to be on another video. I really would like 2 of these, but yeah, GeForce 4 or 2 both have their advantages, and then Voodoo 2 or 2 of them to cover Glide, well, that's certainly possible and way to go if you don't have Voodoo 5 or something. But Voodoo 3, yeah, it would have been good GPU here as well. Yeah, this is, by the way, fastest DOS GPU, this Voodoo 3 that I've tested. So it does DOS very well as well, but those results, well, it really doesn't matter much. But there's something about Ezra we need to take a look before going on. Let's place Ezra on the left and Katmai on the right. Well, of course, it's not surprise the Katmai 550 MHz is faster. But the interesting thing about these, there's not that much difference. In fact, these Quake 2 scores, yes, remember this, forget this, because these are VSync limited here. But other than that, they are comparable. And something to remember here, Pentium 3 has SSE instructions that the Ezra does not have. Ezra has 3D now. But Pentium 2 doesn't have SSE, and of course it don't have 3D now because only AMD. Intel never supported 3D now. But if you think fastest Pentium 2 is 100 MHz slower than this Katmai here, and how this Ezra-T at stock clocks perform, well, you could say that Ezra is matched for fastest Pentium 2, and if you overclock Ezra, well, it absolutely is going to be faster. Of course, you could overclock Pentium 2 as well, so. But what I'm trying to say is that if you are planning to build Pentium 2 system, well, maybe you should build Ezra-T system instead, because you get pretty much the same performance, but you get 3D Now instructions that might benefit somewhere. But most importantly, you get absolutely a lot better DOS support. Now we can take a look how Ezra does DOS. and it's so good. Well, it's basically better than any real 486 because it's really 486 expert. And how Nehemiah behaves is completely different. I explained the tests. So what we want to find is setting where the CPU is fastest, as fast as possible without this error too. That's one setting we want to find out, and that's very easy. Just disable branch prediction. It has really very minor impact on performance, and that alone is enough to fix the error 200, and Nehemiah is the same as well. That alone. So we don't have to care about error 200 at all. Cycles here. It works actually quite nicely because it is on real DX2. It is going to fail here. Absolutely, it is going to. So it performs better than with real 486. And this is something like 486 DX between 25-33 MHz. Well, you need to use the command line parameter A here, but that's not unexpected. Just a bit slower with branch prediction disabled, and the 486 starts working. But 386, this is what I call them: 386, 486 and Pentium. These are my naming what is, because this is the oldest and this is with the official 486 patch, and this was the last version that just happens to work on slowest Pentiums without anything, so I call it Pentium. But to get this 386 version work, well, you can, and this is the Ezra's strong point. This is not much slower. It's just a bit slower, and you can tune it something like that. You can fine-tune performance within 486 levels very easily, and I don't know any other CPU that can do this. Not even real 486. So you basically can get anything to work, and you can tune the CPU performance as fast as possible to get anything to work. And that's not all. The video, I absolutely had to start taking the landmark benchmark into account for also, because I wanted to see if this CPU correlates to some of these settings, and it's not that easy, as we'll see on the Nehemiah, but on Ezra-T, this instruction case disabled. This is very good setting. And whole L2, it doesn't slow it down as much as it does on pretty much every else CPU, 6th generation CPU. Oh, about 6th generation. One thing about Ezra you should know. I mentioned that Pentium 2 build, but Pentium 2 is of course 686, or rather Pentium Pro level CPU, that it does support instructions that came with Pentium Pro. But Ezra, it doesn't. It's basically Pentium level. And that holds true for AMD K6 as well. It doesn't support conditional move instructions that came with Pentium Pro. But Nehemiah of course supports them as well, so it is truly real 6th generation x86 CPU. But Ezra and K6, well, they are Pentium level 5th generation CPUs. Something you might want to consider if you wanted to build Pentium 2, but want to use Ezra-T instead. But I don't think it causes any much issues, because software had to be backward compatible for a long time. But something to know. So really, you can fine-tune very well this Ezra-T, But this video benchmark, this is something where it also shines, because you can slow down the video performance to VLP levels, fast VLP 486 systems. On every other CPU, well, if you slow the Nehemiah to 486 levels, you are going to have very fast video performance. It affects scrolling. It doesn't always have affect anything, but something to note that ideally you want to slow CPU to real 486 levels, but you also want video performance to 486 levels as well, so you don't have to fast scrolling and things like that. And Ezra-T, it can do both. But really, the 486 levels, that's where the Ezra-T is simply beyond excellent. You can get fast Pentium levels, you can get, or rather it's a mid Pentium level performance as well, very good. They might come in handy. You get the X2 level performance, and you can even get multiplier down, so you can get the slow Pentiums. But was there something, let's see, to get DX4 levels? I think there was, but if you get slow Pentium, where do you need DX4 anyways? But absolutely, if you have motherboard that can do 50 MHz bus, then absolutely at least then you can do DX4 levels. But what is necessary is 386, and this is the slow it goes, and this is a bit too fast. Well, this is barely slow enough for Wing Commander and Ultima 6 level, so it can do that, but slower it won't go unless you have motherboard that does 50 MHz frontside bus. And if you can't change frontside bus at all, well, it can't do 386 at all, unfortunately. Or at least it can't do this level, perhaps DX40, but you want DX25, because that's where Wing Commander Ultima 6 are targeted. And those, well, they slow down or get faster when CPU is slower or faster. And that's very bad way to make games, but that's how it is. And the 386 DX25, well, that's golden for them. And this is close enough if you can get your frontside bus to 66. But 286, just forget. And even to get here, you want motherboard where you can drop to 66. If you have motherboards where you can't change frontside bus speed at all on those prompt, well, Nehemiah is going to be better. For Ezra-T, it's 486 expert. It really is. This is where it shines like no other CPU. And now, I did first started taking Nehemiah test, but then during the Ezra test, this landmark, I decided I needed some synthetic benchmark more, and I started taking this landmark test. So forget about these and let's concentrate. I started taking Nehemiah test because at this point it was so fast, this Nehemiah, and I already know it can do slow enough. So I redid all the tests, those tests, and they are quite different than with Ezra, because disabling L1, it does have much more effect on this Nehemiah. Ezra doesn't have long pipeline, and Nehemiah has much longer pipeline, and perhaps that's one reason why it depends L1 much more, and that makes it harder to slow down, because L1, well, it slows much more dramatically. And oh yeah, one thing I don't have any where only data case would be alone disabled, and instruction case would be enabled, because it wasn't even necessary with this Ezra. And SETMUL didn't support it. So first test with Nehemiah, well, it became apparent that I need to try disabling the data case as well. And SETMUL didn't do it, but CPU speed could do it. So I used this for a bit, and to notice I can get fast for it, or rather I can get it to DX33 and DX2 levels that otherwise were missing here. So it was important setting for Nehemiah, but not really for Ezra at all. But I posted on the SETMUL thread on Vocons that maybe it can be supported, and I received version for testing, it 1.26, and it's not quite, there are some small minor issues so to be fixed, but that doesn't even affect anything here. So I have here is SETMUL that can disable data case, not only the instruction. So here are lots and lots of benchmarks. But before going to details, there's going to be a pattern here, and only way to get both of these, or even either of these, because they always behave the same way, without using the command line parameter, is you are going to need to disable instruction case, either instruction alone or full L1 case. And that's just how it is. Data case alone, well, you are going to need the A parameter, no matter how slow you set your FSP and multiplier. But that's not really an issue, because with instruction case alone disabled, you get about 486 DX 20 MHz performance, and that's already fast enough. And sure, you can fine-tune it faster on Ezra, but I don't think it matters that much. But if fine-tuning 486 levels of performance is your thing, well, Ezra is going to be better. But this is going to be good, and this is very good performance level. Very, very compatible. I don't think you are going to have any performance issues on Sierra games, for example, and those have so many performance related issues. But I don't think you are going to have any with this setting, because these are very good indication. If these work without command line parameters, well, that's going to be very good. I don't ever remember having any issues with Sierra games if these work. And seems like I forgot to mention at the beginning about this Space Quest 4 test. Well, this is basically okay if you can initialize Zone Cluster. This is a performance issue, and not okay if you can't do it. I didn't even do that test here with Ezra, because I remember that this is something I might be a good thing to do. But it behaves better than expected on Nehemiah here. Because even with these DX2 performance levels, where this, you are likely going to have issues on real DX2. But here you didn't. And this Space Quest 4, well, you are going to have performance related issues with DX2. So you can't really play it with this performance anyways. But yeah, so it's not really important benchmark here. But on real systems, I'm going to use it from now on. This is a really good compatibility pack. Perhaps I'll change this to some bit older, but I'm not sure if it's necessary. let's see, here I used Basequest for CD conversion, and it has this out plus driver dated. Here is the date, and here this is a size. So I suppose when I do this test again, I'm going to write something a bit older. But other than that, it may not even change anything. Now what am I saying about the pattern? So you need L1 or at least instruction case disabled. So these are okay. If you disable it, it's always going to be okay. Well, I didn't try it with, well, I did try with even with overclocking. But it doesn't, overclocking doesn't, it has only minimal effect here. It's slightly faster, yes. But should you overclock your CPU just to get it this little faster? Perhaps not. But it's your choice, and of course, if you already have 1400 MHz Nehemiah that is fastest that is released, just use these same settings. It doesn't affect that much anyways. Oh, and something I should notice. CPU ID on my Nehemiah is 69A. A is the stepping, and stepping 8 and later should be called Nehemiah Plus. So I indeed have Nehemiah Plus here, but unless it affects overclocking, because it's later, it might, but the changes that this Nehemiah Plus has, well, it doesn't affect performance any here. It's just some features that, well, they are completely insignificant here. So just forget it, but I wanted it, I wrote it here just so to be completely precise, we are using Nehemiah Plus. To disable the instruction case, well, this DX 486DX, or slow 486 rather, I should call it. This is the best you can do, and it's very good setting, so it's not really. But to get faster 486, you need to disable the data case and leave instruction case enabled. And also with instruction case disabled, you have this really fast video performance. Really fast. But to get it to closer to VLP levels, and these are also very fast actually, you need to disable the data, at least the data case or whole L1. So if you can disable whole L1, that's the best, because it slows CPU and it slows video performance. But of course this is much faster than 386 would do, because disabling L1 alone, you have this excellent optimal DX 486 DX 25 MHz setting for Ultima 6 and Wing Commander. And what's even better, you don't need to change frontside bus speed at all. This is, you can get this with 133 MHz frontside bus, and same with this one. So you don't need any special motherboard. You get this excellent performance levels with such easy. So, but what we can get others with disabling data case? Well, here DX 40 MHz about, and of course you can't compare it with real systems. As I mentioned, PC player, well, it supports FPU. Quake, we can ignore it on these slowdown settings anyways. 3D pens, well, you have basically, I place most faith on Doom, but sometimes just compare 3D pens, sometimes Doom. And if you want to go real slow 386 levels, use Doom minimum. So this is roughly DX40 and these other levels as well, of course. Something you can do by lowering frontside bus, this you can get slower video performance, but it's going to be fast anyways. Even this is fast, or perhaps it's something reasonably good VLP performance. Fastest VLP cards can do faster, but then you have faster CPUs anyway, so this is actually quite good. So you can use the frontside bus to slow down VGA performance if you think you have too much scrolling or whatever. But if you can't disable data case, well, it's going to be too fast anyways, even with 66 MHz frontside bus. So, but yeah, data case disabled, you can get DX2 levels. These are perhaps slower than 66 MHz, but performance here, we can say this is DX2 level. You can get Pentium MMX levels as well, and again, we are simply using the same 133 MHz frontside bus speed. So that frontside bus alone, well, you can get really everything you really need. And disabling branch prediction alone is enough to fix this error to 100, just as like with Ezra. But if you overclocked, branch prediction disable is only going to work up to 133 MHz. It's 1333 MHz. It's somewhere here. 1300 MHz. That's the limit. Here I tested memory latencies, and everything else is tested with CL2 and CL3. Well, it's going to make it slower when you actually would want it to be a bit faster. So CL2 is simply better. Use CL2 memory if you can. And for that reason, I didn't even test here those ECC memories or registered DIMMs, because you would want Nehemiah to be a bit faster, not a bit slower. And also, if you have more than 512 MB memory, well, it doesn't show on DOS at all. So basically the slowdown must happen only when it's addressing over 512 MB. And DOS reserves memory from bottom up, so it doesn't appear on DOS, but it should appear on Windows, and it should. I mentioned about should because I couldn't get Windows to boot any longer, and I even tried to apply the memory patch again, but no, I couldn't get it working, so I couldn't boot Windows anymore, so I didn't want to reinstall a whole Windows, so the performance issue with over 512 MB memory on Nehemiah, well, that's a mystery for now, but I'm quite sure it's going to affect Windows and only memory addressed above 512 MB, and that's basically this Windows reserves memory from top to down, so it's always going to affect Windows performance, but not DOS. But here, well, where was I? Now, if you do have motherboard where you can change frequencies, well, it doesn't do that much, but some settings are better. You can do some fine tuning about 386. You can get 386, 33, 40. You can get this real slow 386 SX or 286 levels performance. You have some different 386 DX25 with at least faster VGA, but do you really want that? You have slow Pentium. You can have middle Pentium performance. You can have different 486, slow 486 settings. So yeah, you have more control if you can adjust the frontside bus speed. But really it's not necessary with Nehemiah. These are the most important, and these you can get without changing frontside bus speed. everything else is just extra. And of course this is important as well to prevent this error to 100. But now, since this, you needed instruction case to be disabled for this in the last crusade. 386 and 486 versions to be used without command line parameter, and Ezra-T was better in that regard. You could fine tune it just to the perfect speed. So could ESFM do? It's less sensitive than OPL3. Perhaps it could do better. Perhaps I could use, say, like this, the X25, because it's not supposed to be too fast. Although this land-pass CPU score, well, these are completely, you can't trust these scores if you have instruction case enabled. And pretty much this is the reason why these fail as well. So at least they show the importance of the instruction case. But what if the ESFM could do better? And I was quite surprised that it doesn't. You still need the very same command line parameters. On Riva 486, you absolutely are going to see differences. ESFM is less speed sensitive. And I take a quick test with OPL2. Well, here it performs pretty much the same as OPL3, and that's in real old systems, that's of course completely not true, because 25 MHz, it doesn't matter if it's 386 or 486, that will work fine with OPL3, but anything faster, and this first this and then this is going to fail. So I was quite surprised. This instruction case, well, it affects so much. So, but I then started to experimenting first with ESFM and MIDITO. Well, that's something I made. It was MIDI to port somewhere. That's where the name comes from, because that's the only thing it was supposed to do. Just redirect, because many games are hard-coded for MIDI port 330. So if you have it on some other port, well, you can redirect it to somewhere else, and that might be good if you have, say, one MIDI card on a Sound Blaster, and then you have some other controller for, say, real MT32 and whatever. And so redirecting is a nice feature, and it was supposed to do only that, and that's why it's called MIDITO, because MIDI-to, and then you write command line parameter where you want to redirect it to. But it got lots and lots of more features in quite short time actually, and I haven't done anything to it in a long time. But we are going to have to see what it does on some another video sometimes. But one of those things is that it can add delay when accessing OPL. And this delay, it's very simple. It simply jumps. Loop with number of jumps. And of course, this is exactly the kind of delay why these old games are speed sensitive. And exactly the kind of delay why when we now have instruction case enabled and this CPU score jumps to something very high, and you suddenly need to use this command line parameter even with this one, even though it should work with real system with 25 MHz. But that jump, it was to simplify things basically, and but I think it simply should be changed to something like seconds. You specify number of microseconds as delay, but that requires quite a lot of changes. But perhaps we should make a video sometimes how do you measure CPU clock rate. But that's another thing. So this is number of jumps. So I wanted to test how much do you need to delay before you get ESFM to work. And cycles, well, this is by the way, the DX2 setting. For cycles, you only need to specify A without any jumps, and that's basically the board trapping overhead alone. So minimum delay that you even can do, and that was enough for cycles. But for this 386, well, at this DX2 performance settings, well, you need quite a lot of jumps, but you can fix it, and that's exactly what this program is made for. So yeah, but for this 486 version, only 10 jumps necessary. When we go to this DX 40 MHz setting, well, the 386 version, 90 jumps. And for 486 version, well, board trapping delay alone or overhead alone is enough. And this DX 33 MHz setting, only 6 for this 386 version is needed. And here, this DX 25 MHz setting, you only need 2. But I was quite hoping that overhead alone would be enough, but it doesn't really matter. You need 2 and you need 2. And this was for ESFM. What about OPL3? Well, here you can easily see that it's going to be much more speed sensitive. Here, and this is the DX2 performance settings, you are going to need the A is for this DX2 setting enough alone for cycles. So cycle isn't any problem anymore. But for this 386 version, you need over twice the jumps than the ESFM. And this 486 version, well, it was, when the 10 was enough here, you need almost 10,000 here. So yeah, quite a difference. What about this DX40 setting? You can do 90 and board trapping overhead alone here, but not with real OPL3. It's 1900 and 590. And you can go less than half with them with this setting, but quite a difference to ESFM and here as well. And yeah, OPL3 is more speed sensitive, but with MIDITO, these settings, well, you can use them as well. But of course, you are absolutely going to have another speed issues with this setting, though I'm not sure with these games, but Sierra games absolutely. This might be good, but I wouldn't bet on it. This is perhaps safer, but this should be good. But again, with instruction case, you can't be quite sure. On real 486 DX 25 MHz, absolutely. And DX 33 is going to be mostly good as well. Not perfectly good, but mostly. But I've used real DX40 quite a little, so that this I can't say. But this is the speed where things start to break. And this is going to be good. And Ezra, well, since you can fine tune with instruction case disabled, is going to be, that's a real nice feature. But Nehemiah, well, just if you want to be sure everything works, just use this. This is good setting. You can get it bit faster with Ezra, but it shouldn't matter. This is very good and compatible setting. If you think you want bit faster, well, here are your options. You can use this as well if you want, or if you even don't use any OPL sensitive game, well, you don't need to use MIDITO at all, so you can get other performance levels. And Nehemiah, it's going to be certainly fast enough on Windows, and you get all what you need for DOS, so it is simply excellent all-in-one CPU. Simply excellent. Ezra does DOS little better, but it's not going to be that good in Windows. Tualatin, it's very good on Windows, of course, but then again, if you play those later games, maybe Windows XP system is going to be better for them anyways, so I don't think I wouldn't build Tualatin Windows 98 system. Unless you have some really, some games just happened like Windows 98 for much and but really this is not for me at least. And if we take a look at this DOS how it performs on DOS, it's of course going to be better than Katmai, but still, do minimum 17 FPS, do maximum 4 FPS. This is good actually for 386 DX25. This is good for Wing Commander and Ultima 6. But really, you're in the 386 DX25 level. And for anything else you are going to need to use throttle. So I suppose you can live with this if you really have to. And it's certainly better than the 286 level performance you get with the Katmai. Absolutely, this is much better. Here is, by the way, overclocked. This isn't Windows stable overclocking, but it was stable enough so I could run this DOS benchmark. So perhaps this gives you some info how the fastest Tualatin Pentiums would perform here. So yeah, quite good. If you're happy with this one, fast 386, yeah, why not? But somewhat slower Windows performance and you get much better DOS support with Nehemiah. I completely forgot one thing, and not only that, I did some last minute benchmarks. And the thing I forgot was how these different graphics cards DOS performance. And actually I didn't even talk about Kyro Windows performance at all. I kind of completely forgot. But let's go to the Kyro Windows benchmarks. Well, they just happen to be just above Voodoo 3 results, and that's pretty much where you want it to be compared to, because it is a bit slower than Voodoo 3. I guess that sums it real nicely. But for some reason it was bad at Unreal. Now I'm not sure about, I don't even remember anymore about the VSync. Is it here because maybe it said refresh rate to 85 Hz. I should have paid more attention to it. But then again, Unreal maximums are, this is 75 Hz, so maybe I think VSync was disabled here on these Quake results. And well, OpenGL results certainly not even close to Voodoo 3. And this actual game with Direct3D, well, you can't of course compare it to Glide, but you can compare it to the TNT2 results. And under 50, under 40 and 30. So let's take a look. It's actually a bit below these Unreal results, below TNT2, and it was underclocked a bit that TNT2. So, but these 3D Mark 2000 scores, well, they are just a bit below, and this is actually a bit above Voodoo 3. But yeah, it's not fast. But it does has real nice 16-bit rendering, that's for sure, because I think I should have taken some screenshot then and I didn't. But that's its strong point, but really. And also I should mention this number 5 note here. This video memory cache mode, it needs to be set to UC, because this setting that I used for every other card, well, it didn't work. After installing drivers, whatever version, the Windows simply hang that black screen. I think it was green screen on one of those drivers, but black mostly. but this was the solution for it. But do I want Kyro? I don't think. It was low on Windows, and I think it was 2 years after Voodoo 3 it was released, so yeah, it's just slow. And it is not good DOS performer either. But it does had one advantage. This PC Player SVGA. Well, the score itself isn't that great, but there was no flickering here. It flickered with all other AGP cards. Well, that was Kyro wasn't AGP, of course. So maybe it's AGP, maybe BIOS, VGA BIOS issue, I don't know. But let's see, it was TNT2, GeForce 2, 4, Voodoo 3, and Radeon as well. It seems it was also GeForce FX 5500 PCI also did that, but it was different kind of flickering. It has more of graphical errors, and it was worse than any of these. Really, Kyro was only card that was free from that flicker. You can slow down to avoid the flicker, and you had to slow down your system to the Pentium MMX level, and it was 33 FPS when it was free from the flicker. So it is some sort of speed issue, but hard to say for sure what exactly caused it, because if this also had it, well, it can't be AGP. But I suspect it's VGA BIOS related. It's something VISA functions too. So maybe you can use the display doctor to fix it. I didn't test that, but if not, well, you need to slow down your system. But yeah, Kyro was noticeably slower. Is it because of PCI? And how much not? If we take a look to this GeForce PCI, well, 3D bench score is pretty much the same, and I think this actually could be PCI bottleneck here. But here, Kyro was noticeably slower. On SVGA, there's not much difference. Top bench, well, it was noticeably slower. Quake, yes, slower. And the E, well, it shows different resolution, and I didn't bother to simply edit those files to get proper 640 by 480, because really you're not going to play this anyways with Kyro. So yeah, but here Doom, it was faster than GeForce 5500, and here but slower than anything else. But the difference isn't that high compared to this, and this is where we get to the another issue, because this happens, especially these Doom scores. I think it's when Nvidia moved to AGP 8X, and that's where the drop happens. They changed something VGA related, whatever it is, I don't know. And I was quite happy that my GeForce 4 Ti, this is the AGP 4X version, well, it doesn't suffer the slowdown. As you can see, it performs pretty much identical to the GeForce 2. And Doom score here is almost halved. And this of course could be PCI related. But to make sure what is PCI related and not, I did run benchmarks with the GeForce 4 MX that had broken memory. It has graphical errors on every test, of course, but I could run the test, and that's the main thing, because I really wanted to get, because this is of course NV18A is the AGP 8X version, so it also suffers from the slow VGA. Here we can actually compare AGP card to AGP, and yes, you lose not as much than on PCI, but still it is slower, but this isn't too bad. Here there is no PCI bottleneck, and it shows PC player. Well, this is faster, yes, but it's not big thing, and this flickers, of course, like the other cards. Quake. Well, Quake, there's really no difference. But the Doom, something Doom related has changed on the HGP 8X versions, and this is where it suffers. But really these aren't too bad, so avoiding the HGP 8X versions to get better DOS performance, well, I don't think it matters. But if you want to get slower DOS performance, well, forget about this HGP version completely and just go to some PCI GeForce like this one. PCI late, of course, that it does have this issue, and that would FX series every card has it so. But if you have PCI GeForce 4, well, I don't actually know. Is it more likely you get the 4X version or 8X version chip? So really, if you want slow DOS performance, just go for the GeForce FX PCI then. Can you actually benefit from the slow VGA? And I did scrolling tests. Actually, the main thing was about to compare this DX25 setting that has slow VGA. Where exactly is it? It's somewhere here. This has the slow VGA performance, this setting, but the synthetic benchmark CPU score is quite a lot higher. Then we go to this excellent setting. We have synthetic CPU score what it should be, but we have very fast video performance. Because on Ezra-T you don't have to make compromises, you can get both, but not with Nehemiah. So I wanted to test, does it even matter? So, but I can't capture anything DOS other than with the Trident, so I benchmarked the Trident as well. And yeah, it's slowest card I benchmarked, but the Doom scores actually are better than with the GeForce PCI, but that's about it. It's overall it's easily the slowest VGA card here I tested, and that was completely expected. So with that one I could capture Space Quest 1 scrolling with this DX20 setting versus this DX25 setting, and there is difference, yes, but it's not that big. But the scrolling speed, it wasn't that much. There wasn't that much difference, so I don't think it matters that much. I really wish I could have captured these GeForce scrollings, but my capturing setup is what it is. But yeah, on GeForce 4 Ti, you could see the difference in scrolling, but it wasn't too great. And with this slower, that gives much lower Doom scores. Well, I don't think it really matters on those games, because it's really hard to say was there even any difference between this fast DOS GeForce 4 versus this slow DOS GeForce 4 MX. So getting this HGP 8X card simply for DOS, well, there's absolutely no point doing that. But to actually properly compare this, I would have needed to capture and then compare side by side. But of course that already tells that the difference are so small that they hardly even matter. But that was something that I'm glad I tested and remembered to test. So I'm going to go with Nehemiah on this build. But the graphics card, well, that's not completely decided yet. we'll return that on another video, but perhaps not next video, because I think I want next video to be something else. It's too much about this build, but this build will definitely going to return this. There's much to be done yet, but CPU is going to be Nehemiah. So thank you for watching, and please see the next video as well. Goodbye.